Hey everybody, welcome to the Renaissance Woodworker shop update for October 14th, 2016. Here's what's happened in my shop this week. I've got some big 10 and 12 quarter bits of sapele here that I'm planing into long strips because I'm making panel clamps. And I've got a couple of big multiple board glue ups on the horizon, and I wanted something to make those 3, 4, and 5 board panel glue ups just that much easier. This one is made using Veritas hardware, but I've got some homegrown hardware I'm making as well that cost about $8 compared to the 40, 45 some bucks that the Veritas hardware cost. So there's going to be a video coming out on that hopefully in the next couple of days. I've got one done. I'm actually making 3 more right now. So once I get those done, I'll go ahead and put that video out and you'll see the whole construction. It's relatively simple, but you'll also get to see them in action and how well they work when it comes to clamping up a panel. In other news, this weekend I'm going to be getting back to that inlaid award plaque that I talked about several weeks ago. Kind of all got held up by Woodworking in America, and then getting some veneer and getting my supplies and everything. Well, because of that, you know I've been in a bit of a veneer frame of mind, and I've been starting to lay up some different bandings and play around with that. And I came across this wooden toothing plane in an antique store locally, and it's just in incredible condition. It's one of these nice vintage models that's almost at 90 degrees. Some of them you'll find at 90, some of them even a little past 90. I really like the ones that are at like 85 degrees to 90 degrees. There are absolutely no cracks in the body. It's in just incredible shape. And even just looking at the color of the body itself, I wonder if the thing was really ever used. The blade definitely needs to be tuned up and restored, but it's one of those things where I need a toothing plane like I need a hole in the head. I got another one. It's right over there in my tool cabinet. But I just saw this one in such incredible condition and I just couldn't stand to leave it sitting on the shelf. So I wonder how many of you out there have the same problem I do. I have been pretty good about getting rid of superfluous tools in my shop, but every now and then I just get tempted and figure there's got to be a reason to have a second toothing plane around, right? So yeah, there's my weakness, the old vintage tools that just look like they haven't been used enough and just need a little love. Finally, this week I got a question from George about sharpening a spokeshave blade that he just got, and it's one of these concave blades. Now, first things first, I'm not actually a big fan of concave spokeshave blades. What are they meant for? Well, they create a curve. Well, an outside curve like that can be created with a straight spokeshave blade. And set lightly, you can remove many of those facets and get a perfectly round shape just using a flat blade. And a flat blade is so much easier to sharpen. But that being said, every now and then there is a reason to have one of these concave blades like we see here. And that's one of the reasons I picked up this old vintage Stanley that's got both the straight and the concave blade on here. It can be very, very useful for the final finishing stages of a project. But George is wondering, how do you go about sharpening one of these things? More importantly, it's brand spanking new and it needs full restoration. So the first thing you want to do is take it to the grinder. And with a flat grinding wheel like I've got over here on my hand crank grinder, there's not a whole lot you can do here. But you can use your diamond dresser that you use just to clean up the wheel to actually shape a curve into the wheel. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It's not like you're necessarily ruining your wheel or dedicating your wheel to that, although there's nothing wrong with having dedicated wheels. In fact, I have a really thin 1/4 inch grinding wheel that I got from Tools for Working Wood that is shaped into a tight curve that I use if I ever have to regrind my hollows and round blades. Only my small numbered hollows and rounds, the really narrow ones. But for a blade like this, that is, what is this, probably an inch, inch and a half wide, I can grind a curve on my stone. In fact, I have a bit of a belly to the stone anyway to prevent overheating. So it's just a matter of coming in here with the dressing tool and just kind of rounding things over a little bit. And you'll find you can actually do it pretty quickly. which is a good thing because if you ever want to go back to flat, it's pretty easy to come back and flatten it out from there. Yes, you may be wearing down the stone a little bit prematurely, so if you do find yourself doing a lot of this type of work where you've got to grind a lot of these blades, then maybe you want to dedicate a stone to it. But here's the thing. I ground this bevel on this blade 3 years ago when I bought this spokeshave, and I have not needed to grind it since. So a lot of times when you're grinding an inside curve like this, it's a simple one-off operation. And if you maintain that edge, you can always come back and just clean it up with stones and things like that. If you nick it, you can grab several diamond conical files, or just go and get yourself a chainsaw file at the big box store, and you can file that edge and file out that nick and kind of see to the maintenance and a little bit more extreme maintenance of a concave blade like this. Rarely do you actually have to go back to the grinding stone to do any serious steel removal. So don't be afraid to shape it for that one time and then flatten it out after the fact. Like I said, a little belly in the center of the stone only will prevent overheating too. And in maintaining this blade, I mean, that's really where the majority of your time is going to be spent. So let me go ahead and take this out. Now, using a diamond file, diamond conical file like this, you can come in and just work that edge and go relatively fine with it. And this is just a matter, I like to hold it firm against my body, extend my fingers so I've got good control over it, and I can sight down the bevel. I'm looking right down the bevel like this, so I can see that I'm matching that bevel. I also can look at the scratch pattern and see that I'm doing that as well. So this is kind of that medium stage to refine that cutting edge. Now, flattening the back of it is done just as you normally would on a stone. I also have this DMT Wave tool. This is a kind of a cool little thing. I don't use it that much, but when I've got a blade like this, it can be really useful. And this is very, very fine. This is, I believe, equivalent of 1,000 grit stone. So I can now come back and I can match that bevel. Get a little lubricant on this first. It's always a good thing. Now I can match that bevel and I can refine it even further. This is a constantly changing radius, so what you'll find you'll have to do is actually kind of rotate the blade throughout the arc. So just the same thing we were doing here, where I was running the file across that arc, I'm now taking the blade to it and I'm running the blade through that arc. And I actually do like to push it more than pull it, because then I'm changing my scratch pattern entirely from what I was just doing on that conical file. And I can really see where I've hit it and where I haven't. Now this is already pretty close to sharp, so that's ready to go at this point. There is a slight hollow ground here, so I can see a polished section at the heel and a polished section at the toe or the actual cutting edge, and a little bit of the grinding marks still in the middle. Now, where I really am maintaining these guys, and where I do most of my work day in and day out, just pull off that little bit of a burr. Good. Most of the time, I'm using a strop to maintain this edge. I've got multiple strops floating around the shop, but I've got this piece of leather specifically that's not attached to anything, and it's a little bit thicker, it's got a little bit more give to it, and I can pinch it in my fingers and I can match the arc that I want. So here, again, sighting down the edge of it, behind the scenes I've got my finger, I'm pinching it, but I've also got a finger in the middle, so there's a little bit of support in the middle of the peak of that arc. I can match that and I can strop that edge very easily. And it's a very short stroke, because as soon as I come back here, it starts to widen up on you a little bit. But this thicker leather, this is a full 1/4 inch thick, it really nicely supports the blade when you bend it like this, and I can get full stropping coverage of that entire edge. This is how I will maintain the edge for months and months and months and months and months, And then rarely will I then have to go back and use a file. I won't go back to the grinder. I'll go back to the DMT Wave, or really most of the time, just this little conical diamond stone, just because I find that the action is a little bit easier to work with. But as long as you maintain that edge with the strop, it will stay razor, razor sharp. If you start to let that edge go, the strop won't do too much for you. This is obviously very, very fine grit, and it could end up taking for bloody ever if you've got to really resharpen an edge. And it's just as simple as that. It's a freehand technique. I realize that might scare a lot of people, but the idea of holding it up and sighting down the bevel and matching your tool, your abrasive, to that bevel is really quite easy, and it's a great introduction to freehand sharpening. Now honestly, if you're just terrified of the freehand thing, I do encourage you to try it, but if you want something that's a little bit safer, one of the things you can do is find a dowel that matches that radius, wrap some sandpaper around it, wrap consistently finer and finer grits of sandpaper, and you can refine it that way. Or you could take your dowel and you could mount it in a vise or whatever and actually pull that blade back across it. But you're still having to freehand across that, but at least you're not having to rotate it because you've got something that perfectly matches that radius. You can do the same thing with a strop. If you're able to create either with a dowel or create with a block of wood, if you've got this sharp and you can actually use the shave to shape the exact mating piece to it on a block of wood, you can use the same honing compound on this strop to just kind of color that in and use that as a custom made strop for this specific blade. But I think you'll find that if you get enough of these, you're going to end up with all these custom made strops and custom made profiles to sharpen all your various other profiles, and something like a flexible piece of leather or a conical diamond stone will end up being a little bit more utilitarian for you to handle more edges.